I've worked from home for several years, and there were times where I worked with people that I had never met. I didn't even know what they looked like. I didn't even bother to look them up on social media or something like that. These are people I worked with for like 4 years, and it was either entirely through email, a couple of them, where I don't even know what they sound like, right? Or maybe a couple times I'd hear them on a conference call, so I knew what their voice sounded like at least. But that was it. That was it. My interaction with these people was all digital. And what I provided for them, what I did for them, was entirely digital. So, in many ways, I was just a brain in a jar connected to electrodes to other brains in jars connected to I mean, people talk about transhumanism as if it hasn't already happened. I mean, it's already here. They're just trying to make it more comfortable. They just want to make it so that the biology, which isn't designed for this, it's not designed to be a brain in a jar hooked up to other brains in jars. So the transhumanists, all they really want to do is they want to make the biology match up with this nightmare reality that we live in, where we don't actually interact in the physical world anymore. And so you lose touch when you don't work with your hands. You lose touch with how things work because everything is fantasy, really. I mean, think about it. If you're a person who works at an office, you're a developer, you have some kind of computer-related job, which, let's face it, in America is a huge number of the people, especially the people of the middle class, the people with money, people that potentially would have power to actually do anything about what the elites are doing to us. Anyone that has the intelligence and the resources to actually be a wrench in the gears. That's with some exceptions, that's a big chunk of the people, right? Well, if your interaction with reality is, well, I wake up in the morning and I maybe listen to a podcast on my phone in the morning while I get ready, and then I start working on my computer, doing whether it's design work or writing an app or whatever it is. You're producing something that doesn't even really exist. It doesn't exist in the physical world, and all the tools that you're using to create it also don't exist in the physical world. And you don't even have to. Most of these guys, I've talked about this before, don't even understand the hardware, the machine that they're working on, how it works. It's to them, it's just a magic screen. I mean, if you're being realistic, they don't understand the inner workings of the machine. They just know they've memorized. Okay, if I push this button, this happens, and they've just memorized all these different steps. And so you're just at that point, you are just a brain in a jar. And then even after your day at work, what do you do then? You watch Netflix. You watch Amazon Prime. So you're not hanging out with your neighbor because you don't know your neighbor. You probably don't even speak the same language that your neighbor speaks. So you're still in your jar, still connected to the network. Only now, instead of interacting with real people like your neighbor, you are now being. I mean, I don't know what the right word is because you're not interacting, but you're just having this fantasy projected onto you that is, whether it's the the new episode of I can't even remember the Game of Thrones or I don't even know what the new ones are, but you know what I'm talking about. You've got the Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, all these different content media conglomerates just pumping propaganda into your jar. And so after that, maybe you watch some porn, or if you really want to kind of pretend that if you want to venture out of your jar, maybe you go on Tinder and you look at the other jars. You swipe back and forth, and maybe you'll go out of your jar, you'll crawl out of your jar covered in goo, and go rub up against another brain for a little bit and feel good, and then you'll quickly retreat back into your jar and do it all over again. And that, I think, is the life for a lot of people in America. A lot of people in America. Oh, and I know you mentioned video games, and there's video games on top of that. So, so maybe you venture into a virtual world. You know, maybe you play Fortnite. Maybe you play, I don't know what, I don't even know. I'm out of time. I used to be a I used to be one of these brains in the jars that was really avidly into gaming, and I've kind of checked out the last couple of years. So I don't even know what the new ones are. But you go into like these virtual worlds and interact with the other brains. But you, and by the way, your neighbor who you don't know, who you don't even speak his language, you have nothing in common with, he's doing the same thing. Just he's doing a different version of it. He's just doing it in Farsi or in Chinese or big warehouse. And now with this quarantine, I mean that is has just really been amplified because you still had, I think, there's some people that have the kinds of jobs where this wasn't the case. You know, the jobs where they're actually showing, and some of these guys they're deemed essential, right? So they're still kind of doing it or whatever, but they're having to now, uh, in terms of social life, you can't. You got to get back in your jar, brain. You know, get back in the jar. You can't. You're not allowed to play with the other brains.